Since we've been in California, we've only used our full overlanding gear twice. In this video, I provide an overview of how we prepared for that second use of the gear. According to Gaia GPS, we traveled about 50 miles off-road on our first day, 47 miles on day 2, and 61 miles on the third and final day, for a total of 158 miles of off-road driving across the Mojave National Preserve along the Mojave Road. When planning to spend 3 days in a desert, I did my usual preparation of viewing other people's videos or blog posts, harvesting pointers and a list of waypoints that I wanted to see, and of refreshing and reviewing checklists to make sure I had any particularly essential gear for what we anticipated encountering. I also did some additional work that I don't normally do. I spot-checked the weather forecast throughout the days prior to our departure and adjusted what personal gear I packed based on the weather we were likely to encounter, brought even more water than we normally bring. We normally bring 20 gallons or about 80 liters. And I took the time to test recovery gear and inspect the rig more thoroughly than I usually do. I have to admit that the last bit is a bit of a lie. I did a thorough inspection of the trailer, and we did take the trailer. But I mostly inspected my Hummer H3 and tested its winch, etc. But in the end, we chose to take Sparky, Kathy's 2022 Wrangler Rubicon 4xe instead. We did so mostly because the Hummer has almost 200,000 miles, and Sparky has only about 30,000 miles. And in honesty, despite planning to do so, I did not test Sparky's winch or inspect its suspension, etc. prior to our departure. I think many of us really enjoy a YouTube video of lessons learned when things go terribly wrong in a very remote place. Good preparation, though, many times prevents those interesting unintended adventures. So while our trip might be a bit less interesting due to its lack of catastrophes, hopefully it can be useful to anyone who enjoys adventures that are longer on beauty and tranquility, and maybe a bit shorter on angst and the character and wisdom that often results from adversity. All right, so it's the day after Christmas, Feast of St. Stephen. Here in the garage, the ladies have all gone out shopping. I think 2 of our sons went out. We're having a wonderful visit. The family came out to join us here in Southern California. And I thought I should follow up on the mystery clunk. I had some good suggestions. One person in the video comments mentioned how the latch in their H3 eventually had a sufficient slop that it would wobble and clunk, and talked about, padding out the gaskets or tightening the hasp there. I might come back and do that. One thing I've learned, just about every thought or suggestion of the source of a clunk was correct, except for anything major. So what I did do today, finally, kind of weird, my weird logic, I'd bought my wife a set of wrenches, and I put 2 in there. Figured she'd put one in Sparky, the other I'd take whichever one she didn't want, realizing I didn't have enough emergency tools in either vehicle for the usual unforeseen kind of thing. I guess if it's unforeseen, then it's not usual. But in any event, one of the essential things you do, especially if you go solo off-roading in remote areas, one of the several things you should really do is have a decent set of tools. So the next thing I'm doing here this morning is just another one of those good reminders: test your winch. So I figured while I'm fooling around here in the garage on a day off work, I'm going to test my receiver-mounted winch. Also kind of pull the line and reel it back in. So I just want to make sure the wiring both to the front and to the back are working. I'll show here the sensible way to wire these, and that typically comes from a marine supplier, is a large 12-volt breaker. So I'll show where I mounted it here. I've got one in Sparky as well for its winch. This will be a little tricky to do with a GoPro, but sorry about that wobbliness. Okay, so this is the breaker, 300 amp breaker to protect against a dead short, and I typically keep it in the open position. So, big heavy wire going to the back of the truck that could rub against things, why keep it there? I always laugh at myself, because then, if that being the case, if I don't test it the day I use it, I'll engage the breaker and it'll pop, and that'll be the end of that, and learn the hard way my winch was not going to function. But in any event, I typically keep it in the open position, and there's an Anderson coupling, as I was just showing on the back bumper, and here in the front position I took the pin out, the tags pop off. I've also got kind of a couple of funky cameras there that I play with, so I disconnect those, and inside the grill here is the front Anderson coupling. So today I'm just going to play with it and make sure that all of my connections are still sound and that the winch itself is working. Okay, as I do this, what I'll also test, I have a corded and a cordless remote, so I'll test both. I've never changed the battery in this, so that's something else I should probably carry a spare of, although I do have the corded remote. So again, oh, I lied to you. Now it's open. I actually was keeping it closed. I didn't realize I'd had it that way. So, should be power to the rear receiver winch. And I'll go ahead and feed it out and feed it back in. You can tell the synthetic line probably wasn't stored as well as it should have been. There's the first test. It definitely looked like the remote itself was dead. Okay, so now I'll hook up the corded remote. You can imagine if I were hit deep in mud, that would not have been fun. Yep, it's the battery in the cordless remote that needs replacing. Well, I went ahead and recorded that little bit just to show that, yeah, the time will come. I'm 58 years old. The time will come. And toting, I think that's like 70 or 80 pounds all in. Toting that from end to end when my truck is stuck will not be so appealing. But in the Hummer H3s, because of the way the front end is configured, a 2-inch receiver actually is a really nice, elegant way to do your winch. Now, if I pop that in at the beginning of a trail ride, it does somewhat compromise my angle of approach, so I usually don't. But that would be the other option, obviously, would be just to put the winch in place before you get stuck. But yeah, hauling around at 80 pounds is not something I'm going to want to do the rest of my life. The front wiring works as well. Perfect. Okay, that's a good use of 20 or so minutes. So someday when I'm on the trail, well, one, I know my cordless remote's not working, but I know all the wiring and the winch itself are in good shape. My least favorite part of this setup is getting my fingers in there to pull this Anderson coupling apart. So I always put my gloves on first, because it does, when it pops off, you can really cut your hands in there. Maybe someday I'll come up with a smarter way to mount it more securely where it faces the outside. The rear one's much easier with the little rubber cap, and I don't have to finagle so much. But given how seldom I run my winch, it's not that big a deal. One of the limitations of the 4xe version of the Wrangler that I covered in one of our early videos after acquiring Sparky is its range. When pulling our M416 trailer with the full weight of our overlanding gear, Sparky gets about 12 miles per gallon. The 4xe version of the Wrangler has 17.2 gallons of fuel capacity versus the standard 21.5 gallons of the other versions of the four-door Ultimate Wranglers. That means I get very nervous anywhere close to 150 miles of remaining range. I usually carry 2 jerry cans at 5 gallons or about 20 liters each, and just splash that fuel into my tank when I return from a trip. However, on this trip, I splashed 5 gallons at the beginning of day 2 and another 5 at the beginning of day 3, so I was never below half a tank while out on the trail. That definitely eliminated any range anxiety that I otherwise may have had. One very important consideration while overlanding in any remote area is having a plan for lack of cell service. We increasingly rely on our phones for anything from emergency communication to navigation. Even the best tools, such as Gaia Maps, can be very misleading. It's not obvious when you're using a live map via a cellular connection versus a map that you have previously saved to your device. So knowing that I would be without cell service for significant portions of the trip, I made sure that I had downloaded the maps on Gaia and that my iPhone had synchronized correctly. I put here a few screenshots showing how you can do this on your phone within the Gaia app. I believe you do have to have a premium subscription to use this feature. But you touch the layers icon in the bottom left of the screen. You can then draw a box and hit save. You should also go back and just make sure that it is synchronized so that your account reflects those maps as being saved, and then any devices that you have synchronized with your Gaia account will have those maps downloaded. Additionally, I now have 2 means of emergency satellite communication. In addition to my Garmin inReach, I now have an iPhone 16. I haven't yet researched the limitations of the iPhone satellite capability completely, so I was pleasantly surprised when it greeted me on the morning of day 2 with an invitation to send messages using a satellite link. It must have noticed an extended lack of time with cell service and triggered a push notification. That was handy. We could update our kids with our status without firing up the Garmin. One of these days, I'll explore that iPhone feature more extensively. One key consideration in packing for an overlanding trip is securing the cargo. I have a number of bits of gear that I use to ensure that I don't destroy gear as we bounce along fairly challenging off-road trails. My checklists are in packing order. This makes sure that the crucial stuff fits, but it also allows me to use the gear itself, including soft, conformable stuff like rubber boots, tarps, and sleeping bags, to fill any gaps. If I can't fill the entire bucket of the M416 trailer, I have load bars that allow me to fill a portion. Similarly, when loading the Hummer or Sparky, I either fill the space or secure items with ratchet straps, bungees, or nets. Finally, I put our folding table across the backs of our seats to protect us from any missiles that I may have overlooked that could launch at us if I brake hard or run into something. That said, best laid plans. On this trip, I did have to rearrange some gear that shifted and kept slapping against Sparky's windows from the inside. Breaking out windows would definitely reduce my enjoyment of our trips. Finally, I always check the tension on any ratchet straps or bungees when we stop for whatever reason. Even the best engineered loads shift, often reducing the tension on bungees and ratchet straps, resulting in further shifting loads. It's also a good idea to check for hot wheel bearings, a secure hitch connection, and any mechanical fasteners like clamps that might start to work loose. On this particular trip, for the first time ever, one of the trailer safety chains bounced out of its loop twice. I reversed the direction that the hook lay in the hoop, and it never happened again, but that only reminded me that the strain on a hitch on an off-road trip is completely different than on a typical road trip. Despite extensive preparation, there were a couple of things I did forget. As I mentioned, I didn't actually test the winch on Sparky, as we ended up switching vehicles. I also forgot to transfer some important things from the Hummer to Sparky, like the first aid kit and the fire extinguisher. I also forgot in the privy that is sometimes something you want to grab urgently. I had it buried in the trailer. So sometimes even the best preparation leaves a few gaps. We get better every time, which is why I keep those checklists in electronic format on a Google Drive, and I use the Notes app on the phone for messages to future Tom as I notice things I forgot or that need attention before the next trip. It's important maybe to remember that luck does benefit the prepared. We probably all heard Alexander Pope's clever aphorism that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Similarly, Scripture cautions us in much the same way as the motto of the Boy Scouts, be prepared, or of the Coast Guard, semper paratus, always prepared. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 5 cautions us, the plans of the diligent end in profit, but those of the hasty end in loss. And in Proverbs chapter 6, we have the biblical version of Aesop's The Ant and the Grasshopper. Go to the ant, O sluggard, study her ways and learn wisdom. For though she has no chief, no commander or ruler, she procures her food in the summer, stores up her provisions in the harvest. How long, O sluggard, will you lie there? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest. Then poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like a brigand. So remember, luck favors the prepared, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Good preparation can keep the adventure fun.